You know who Jimmy Dore is, right?
Yeah, he's got the Jimmy Dore show, and doesn't he have that sidekick Kurt Metzger or whatever?
I'm not sure. I don't know a lot about the guy, but I see clips pretty often, and it just caught my eye because he's kind of got he's almost got a setup like we have in this portion of the studio, where it's just kind of a backdrop. I think he's got a TV behind him or something. But is that guy, is he left-wing, reformed leftist, and now a moderate, or what's his deal?
I mean, from what I can remember, I think he was a real hard liberal, and then he's been getting red-pilled, mainly during the pandemic. He knows somebody, or he had some type of injury from a thing in his arm or something.
Good for him. I mean, not on the injury, but good for him for waking up. I came across a clip of him on Joe Rogan's show, and I don't know how old this is. It may be recent. It may be a few months old. But I thought it was fascinating because what these guys talked about was Trump derangement syndrome. They talked about Russiagate. They talked about Obama. They talked about Libya and a lot of other things that have gone on, that if you have not looked into these issues and understand what's happening in the big picture, you're really missing out. And once you understand these things that they talked about, it really starts to put things in perspective.
The ego mind is like what you're conscious of, your idea of who you are. Mm-hmm. And then the things that you don't like, according to Jung, you split them off and you put them into your unconscious. So when people who hate Trump, like when you see people who have Trump derangement syndrome, that's because they're projecting that part of themselves that is like Trump onto him. Mm-hmm. And so then they can hate that. And that when you have a big reaction to something external, whether it's you love something intensely or you hate something intensely, that tells you it's about you. Mm-hmm. That's about and so like I never hated Trump. I hated the system that got us Trump. Like that's why I tried to keep my focus on. It was because Barack Obama bailed out the banks and kicked 5.1 million families out of their homes, and then went on to give us a right-wing fucking healthcare plan. It was a giveaway to big pharma and insurance company, and he didn't really help. That's what laid the groundwork for people to go for someone like Trump. That always does. Yeah. So that's what when people hate, the people who hate Trump the most are people who have split off that part of themselves that is Trump and put it in their unconscious, and then they're experiencing themselves as they project it onto him. You know those people. I
know a lot of those people.
Like Rob Reiner. Like Bill Maher. Uh-huh. Like there's lots of those people everywhere.
Yeah.
And they, and then they just tell these fantasies about him. He's never going to leave. Oh, Robert De Niro.
Yeah.
Now, Kurt's convinced that Robert De Niro's on some kind of Epstein list or some kind of thing like that, and then he's afraid that if Trump does get power, he's going to expose him. He is actually going to come at him.
Of course Kurt thinks that.
That's what Kurt thinks that.
Kurt thinks that about every fucking thing that happens in the world.
I think that I think Robert De Niro's just got Trump derangement syndrome.
I think he's old, too. There's a thing about old men, and they want to yell at everybody.
And he's completely... Did you see when he went and gave that speech outside of the trial? That was bizarre.
Who told him that was a good idea?
And then he starts yelling at regular people. He's like, fuck you, you're a gangster. Go fuck you.
Like, it's crazy. That's the guy from Taxi Driver.
Yeah.
Like, you know what also I think? I think those guys have no friends. I think the only friends they have are Hollywood phonies.
Yeah, they're surrounded by yes men.
Weird world where everybody you talk to is a phony, and you become a phony, and everyone's a phony, and your grasp on reality is very slippery, and your eyes are going, right? Mm-hmm. So your vision of the world, your actual vision of the world, your ability to read a phone. You ever see old people's text messages? The fucking text on their phone is like as big as my hand.
Yeah,
it's crazy. And so your vision of the world is blurring, literally and figuratively, and then you're getting old, and when old people are tired and cranky, they just want everyone to listen to them, and they don't have time to have a calm conversation, and you state out your opinion, I'll state my opinion, let's see where we have common ground. Hey, get off my lawn! And that's what he's doing. He's being this old grumpy man that is so lost that he thinks it's a good idea to stand in front of a bunch of people on the street and give a speech on camera about how bad Donald Trump is.
Kind of like Joe Biden.
With all the shit that's going in the world.
That I know.
All the craziness of the world.
Right now, the guy you're voting for, a lot of people consider is funding a genocide. Right? So you don't think that's horrible? Look again, if he knew what was happening in Ukraine, more people are being slaughtered in Ukraine for what?
And we just signed another 10 years of that.
Yeah.
Signed on for another 10 years. Worth what, $800 billion?
So this is all a money funneling operation. That's what Afghanistan was, and as Julian Assange taught us, that these wars aren't meant to be won; they're meant to be ongoing. They had a peace agreement, you know that. They had a peace agreement almost immediately after the invasion. Russia invaded. They had a peace agreement, and Ukraine agreed to it. Zelensky agreed to it, and they flew Boris Johnson out there and said, you can't do this, or we're going to kill you."
Yep.
And so he did. That's why he can't do it, and so that's why this war is ongoing, and they have to rip people off corners and put them in vans to go fight in this fucking war. The average age of the Ukraine military is over 40 years old.
Have you seen the videos of guys getting
Yes,
kidnapped?
I can't even watch it.
Guys with their families. They grab a guy.
They just grab him.
Grab him, and people are screaming. They're throwing him in the van. You're going to go fight in a war.
I think you lost the war when we already did. So they did.
Yeah.
So, and then, of course, nobody knows how this war started. You've had Dave Smith on. He explained it.
Yeah.
You know, nobody still to this day knows about the Maidan coup, that the United States got in bed with right-wing Nazis in Ukraine to overthrow a democratically elected government.
Yeah.
And then they started bombing the people in the east of Ukraine, called the Donbass, and they wouldn't stop. They had 2 peace agreements called the Minsk Accords. Guess who violated them? Ukraine. It wasn't that. And so, I've heard people say that, and then, of course, it was the expansion of NATO, right? The threat of putting NATO on the border of Russia, which everybody from Kissinger to Chomsky and everybody in between said, that's a mistake, don't do that. Well, that's, of course, what they're doing. And so what's the point of NATO anymore? And then this whole idea, they're doing the domino theory again. Oh, well, if we
must not know that Joe Biden created NATO.
Next. And it's the same fucking
Somebody
shit
needs to
they
give him a
said
heads up.
all the time.
Yeah,
It's
I
the
didn't know
domino
until
theory.
today either.
And again, the world's terrorists are the United States. Look what we did to Iraq. Look what we did to Libya. Libya, the most successful country in all of Africa. The guy created the 8th wonder of the world with the way how he delivered water and turned deserts into farmland. And everybody had a house, and everybody had education and health care. And we turned it into a failed state run by terrorists with open slave markets. Who did that? Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton did that. And they'll never have to pay a price for that. Barack Obama, the most he'll do is go, that was a mistake.
But why did they get rid of
That's a good impression.
Because he was going to start a currency of Africa that was going to compete with the U.S. dollar and the euro, and they can't have that because the way the United States controls the world is because the United States dollar is the reserve currency of the world. So that's why they can put sanctions on all these countries. And so what they're doing, which they shouldn't do, they're weaponizing the U.S. dollar. And so like when countries want to trade with each other, they have to go take their currency, change it into U.S. dollars so they can trade. And a lot of it was based on the petrodollar, which, by the way, Saudi Arabia just quit. They didn't renew it.
Yeah, hold up.
I did hear about that.
So this is fascinating right here, where he's talking about money, and when Tony Gump's a money guy, he understands this. That is one of the motivating tools, power and money for these people. Call them the globalists, call them the deep state or whatever. And you think about what happened in Libya, and we were all, just like Saddam Hussein, we were all just told and all convinced that, hey, these are bad people. They've got weapons of mass destruction. They're murderers and all this kind of stuff. And so we didn't question our military going in there and taking these people out. And now we look at those places, and what have they turned into? They're worse off than they were before we went over there. And we find out that we were lied to about why we were going over there.
Yeah, and Gaddafi was loved by his people with the free electricity, and he used to give out money for people when they got married to help them get a house, things like that.
That's genius, by the way. Give money to people for having kids, things of this nature. Promote the family.
But we were warned about this decades ago, just even in movies. Follow the yellow brick road. What they meant to say was follow the gold bars and see where they lead to, and that's usually where it starts from.
Mm-hmm. It's all about money, and they literally will ruin countries. And now, what has that gotten us? If we would have kept strong leadership, and we could have made the dollar, the U.S., the worldwide currency, but everybody's leaving it. Why? Because the dollar is worthless. Their money's worth more than ours. Saudi Arabia, which is the most oil-rich country, is like, man, we don't even want to do that anymore. Other countries are starting up with their own currency, and they're like, hey, we got no. And that's what they were trying to prevent in Libya, and now look at it.
No, those countries, Libya, all those ones, Middle Eastern, they weren't a part of our central banking system until after those wars. Each one of them, one by one, as they invaded.
And you can see remnants of that. Like, we always go U.S. debt clock, and we look at it, and you can look at all the countries. What's the one country that's not in debt?
I think they're all in debt a little bit, but if I were a betting man, I'd say Saudi Arabia is going to have some major event pretty soon.
Saudi Arabia is in the best shape out of anybody.
And Russia had low debt, too, before that war as well.
Think about this, and I think they talk about it in this. Maybe they don't. But CBS just put out a report the other day about Saudi Arabia's involvement in 9/11. Now, it's been over 20 years, and all of a sudden CBS is like, whoa, we got this groundbreaking information that Saudi Arabia was involved in 9/11. The Saudi government. Why are you bringing that up? What does it matter? Do you have some sort of narrative that you want to get started? Or are we going to then get retaliation on Saudi Arabia and start a war there because of their role in 9/11? What are you doing?
Yeah, and when 9/11 started, the U.S. had a surplus going on to where our national debt was on the downward trend. And the big banks see that as a threat. If a country ever becomes out of debt, they have no way of controlling them. So they have to keep them in debt, and wars is a great way to do that.
Use that noggin, people. I'm telling you. Anyway, let's go ahead. This is good
Just
stuff.
starting to do news stories about how Saudi Arabia was involved in 9/11.
Oh, there we go.
All of a sudden, 24 years later, all of a sudden, oh, you know what? Turns out there was something happened. And they're like, you mean 2 weeks after they decided to not renew the fucking petrodollar? Now CBS News is allowed to talk about that and investigate it, which when I talked about it, it got demonetized. But anyway, So that's why, because Gaddafi was doing that. He was going to set up a currency for all of Africa, and it was going to be based on have a gold standard. And so they're like, no, you're not. You're not fucking doing that. And they made up a bullshit thing like, we got to save the people. Whatever. You guys, they don't give a fuck about the people in America. They got veterans and everybody else living under every goddamn bridge in this country. You think if they gave a shit about those people, don't you think they'd start helping the people right outside the front door?
Right.
Instead of, no, we gotta go help people in Libya, and we gotta help people. It's about helping people in Ukraine, and it's about helping people in Taiwan, and it's about no. This is all about an upward transfer of money. This is about balkanizing countries and turning it over to BlackRock and Vanguard. That's what this is about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we'll be right back.
That's a good rant. That's a solid rant.
That's another thing. But when it comes down to it, you've got what's going on in Ukraine. Ukraine's going to get demolished. I don't think there's any way around it. It's going to get demolished. And what's going to happen after that? Are they just going to give it all to Russia? No, of course not. Russia doesn't even want all of it. Russia wants what they have now, and they want NATO to stay away from their country. And what we keep when it's over. What is the U.S. going to say? What is the U.S. government going to say? Well, we invested a lot, so we're going to help rebuild this. We're going to rebuild it, and who's going to rebuild it? Who's going to own the rebuilding? It's going to be the BlackRocks. It's going to be the Vanguards, and then they can create this utopia as an example, as a test run, where everything's green energy, everything's all these fantastic, hunky-dory, fuzzy-feeling liberal ideas that they can then show us here and see, look how well it works over in Ukraine. We need to do that here.
And I was just thinking, there might be more than these two, but I know for a fact Iran and North Korea aren't part of the centralized banking system yet. There might be one more country, but there was a whole list 20 years ago, and all those countries have been knocked off since then.
It's so nauseating. I mean, Tony Gump will tell you once he started really looking into this, it really messed him up.
It made me sick for a few weeks. It was hard to go get the mail.
He was all kind of messed up. But now he knows it like the back of his hand, and this is a topic that is so important for people to understand. I know it's easier for people to just keep up with domestic politics and what's going on in a presidential race or whatever, but these worldwide issues are just as important, if not more important, than what's going on here, because it all connects together. It all comes around full circle and lands back right back in our lap. These guys always have bigger plans, bigger ambitions, and it's never good for us. It's never good for the country. Anyway, I just wanted to show y'all part of that clip. That was good stuff. Again, keep your head on a swivel. Pay attention to this stuff. It is vitally important for you to know what's going on.